Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming on to our presentation today. Justin, you can pop your screen back on now as well. So for those of you that are new here, I am Beth Brodowski. I am the president of Iris Creative. We are an audience-centered brand marketing firm that works exclusively with nonprofits. And we run different kinds of sessions. We do these projects, but we also teach classes through our nonprofit toolkit program. But in between all of that, we like to bring interesting programs to you, interesting topics, interesting people. And I had the pleasure of working with Justin a number of years ago on a project for Wharton. And we recently reconnected, and I thought, this is a perfect topic to bring to you. We've been talking a lot about logo design and brand strategy and what the difference is between those two things. And it's so easy to think that a large organization, bing, bang, boom, has everything easy. But there's challenges, whether you're big, whether you're small, whether you have one logo or countless logos. There's always challenges with brand. So today I'm thrilled to bring to you Justin Flax. Justin is the creative director at Wharton, the business school of the University of Pennsylvania. And I probably even said that wrong. That's how it's listed on your logo. But today we're going to talk about Wharton versus Penn. Any of you that were here for the talk that I gave months ago called All About Logos. Hey, if anybody was here for that, give us a shout out. You might remember that I described logo structures as a hierarchy. Some of you might have one logo, but some of you may have a lot more things that you might not have even thought about. You might have a program logo or an event logo or different things. Yes. Hi, Michael. I know, Michael, you're always here. I love it. So I used Penn as an example of a very structured hierarchy. And I was talking to Justin about it. And interestingly, as we started talking, and I showed it as the top down and this is how it is. And he said, oh, if only it were that simple. So today I'm thrilled to have Justin come on and kind of share a little bit more about Penn and Wharton's overall logo strategy, how we got there, how they use it, and the where that makes things easier and where things are still challenging. So Justin also has a number of slides today that we can we're going to just pop in and pop out of to show you some visual examples of how their brand has evolved. But Justin, I need to start off with the big seminal question that always comes up when we talk about branding. And that is, what the heck is branding? Everybody, like you get a couple of us in a room and we're all going to describe branding differently. And we're going to be talking about it in a specific way today. But to you, to somebody else that works in this world, what does branding mean to you and at Penn?
Yes, hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, branding is a fun topic. It's one of my favorite. What you're talking about is terminology, and we have that discussion all the time, whether it's branding, whether it's logo, whether it's a mark, whether it's a symbol, whether it's a lockup. One of the things that we have to do when we get in the room and we understand who we're talking to is find that common denominator, find that common language of what are we talking about? What do we mean when we say certain words? Mm-hmm. So in this discussion, we're going to talk about branding in terms of its visual identity, in terms of how we talk about a logo, which is actually only one element of a branding toolkit. It is the visual representation of the brand, or maybe the first piece of visual representation of the brand. However, what does brand mean? Brand is higher than the logo. It's the ecosystem. It's the voice of the company. It's the values. It's the proposition statements. And it's all of the things that make up the perception or what one thinks about when you think about a higher brand like Walmart versus Coca-Cola versus their competitors. And so with Penn as a whole, and then it trickles down to Wharton as a sub brand or a child, Penn has set that structure for us. And that comes all the way from the top, from the university and the president's office. And there's something that everybody can look up if you wanted to. If you wanted to Google the Penn Compact 2022, the president's office lays it out for us all. And it comes down to 3 words. And so if I share my screen, I'll even do that for you.
Should be able to do that.
Let's do that. So let's see if I share the right screen. Here we go. So this is the university's, this is the president's office, and she has the Penn Compact here. And when we're talking about branding, it's all stemmed from the top. It's all talking about what is the president's 3 core values. And then what Wharton does is we take these 3 core values and we create our own values as it relates to our school, and so do all the other schools. And so that voice carries through the company or through the university in our case.
So
And
Justin,
so-
the Penn Compact is basically Penn's internal term for their brand, like what their brand means, their story, their key messaging, their values. They sort of rolled it up. They basically branded their brand.
Well, and this changes. I mean, just like any process. So keep in mind as we talk through this, because I know we got some questions prior to coming on the air, that how do you police these things? What do you do with them? And let's just acknowledge that process is an evolving thing, such as this Penn Compact has changed. There was a 2020 version, there was a 2018 version. And so as times change, and now we're into the, what's very hot and heavy in investment is ESG, the environment, social, and the governance. And so inclusion and diversity are for all the other companies as well. And so I think that Amy Gutman had a lot of forethought in bringing inclusion into the compact way before it was a high impact sort of thing. I'm using all the words that are on here.
And I think this is also really interesting for people to see too, because a lot of times the brand is something that is decided on in the leadership world and then maybe through the marketing people. But by taking all of the decisions, all the values, all of the ways that what brand means at Penn and putting it into a website or a microsite and putting it out there, even though it changes and evolves, it allows for it to be public facing. The way we always describe branding and our process is we call it AMY, audience, message, image, experience. And anything that can get that brand, get like, what's that message and how do we get that out so that people understand what we're shooting for? I mean, that has to be helpful in getting people to understand like the why behind you need to put this logo on this page.
Right. So we're going to get to the visual stuff. Don't worry about that, everybody. But I do want to set the ground for where all this comes from. You have to have a container. You have to have some constraints for anything that you do. Anything that you design, anything creative has to have a deadline, has to have some constraints. And in this case, we're trying to carry out a mission and a vision for a larger institution. And so that's where this is coming from. And as we go through it, I'll drill down into some of the other things that we have. So as I share my screen again, I'm switching over to the PowerPoint, and this is a very fluid conversation, so I don't know where we'll go. These aren't the slides that are in a linear fashion. I've just grouped them by conversation pretty much. So if we go back to your first conversation, your first question, and where you started, there was the hierarchy. And the reason that, and not a lot of people, this is public knowledge, but you'd have to go digging to figure out what has changed. At a very, very granular level, there was something here that happened the communications office at Penn started being very nitpicky at some things in the shield. You could see it was off center.
Oh,
And and
oh my gosh, that breaks my heart.
right. And so it's a very famous agency and a very famous person that designed the system. So I won't go into that.
Wow,
But
we won't
the
name names, but I can tell you, I can't tell you how many times we've gotten logos from clients and had to go in and make corrections to them because, we do a lot of work with schools too. And, if you're going to blow up a logo and put it on a basketball court, those little teeny tiny imperfections that may not show on a business card will absolutely show on a basketball court.
right. In full disclosure, there are 12 schools and centers, so I don't have them all here, but this is here for reference to show you what happened and how this evolved, how this logo and the brand and what happened. This happened relatively, it was recent. So this happened during COVID pretty much, or right before we went into COVID. There was some schools and centers that had this line. There's two here that I count in the
The
former.
rule, you mean the rule?
Yeah, sorry,
Mhm.
this rule here.
Yeah.
And there were other schools that didn't even have University of Pennsylvania. And so the idea was to right size all the logos, let's call them sub brands or child logos. And so Penn does not have a rule. They're the parent brand, so they don't have to do that. But
Mhm.
every other school and center is now going to have a rule and University of Pennsylvania underneath.
And it's so funny, because even if you look at the original ones, to the average person, they might have looked at that list and said, wow, you've already gotten a hierarchical system. So,
Right.
so the university had already moved to an overall structure. And I know that happened a long time ago. How long has Penn had this Penn dominant, everything else is underneath of us structure?
That happened, I believe, somewhere between 2003 and 2005, somewhere in
Yeah.
that time frame.
So it's
That it
been
was
it's been a
all right
really
side.
long time that this has gone
Mhm.
on. So, just as Justin was saying, I always say like branding isn't a project, it's a process
Mhm.
that you could have everything and it's working perfectly. You could have things and you discover after it's launched, it doesn't actually work the way you want. And, 18, 19 years later, there things sometimes, as I like to say, migrate, that you'll start to see things in different places. So constantly bringing it back to like, what does consistency and hierarchy mean to us today is so interesting.
Yeah, there's Wharton, I could tell you in our group, when we own the logo, we fixed a lot of things. In fact, we've played with it and made some enhancements so that it printed better or so that it
Mhm.
embroidered more easily. And so I can't speak for the other schools and centers because we're not centralized in that case. And then other schools and centers that don't have large design departments in-house had to take what they were given. And so they
Right.
were not fixed. And then there's evolution, of course. So as you're talking about with the last 20 years of evolution of this logo, things became out of whack, if you will.
Right. Right.
Um,
And that is one of the things with a larger organization, there's a lot more assets to have to keep track of. And there's even disparity within the organization that some departments have, some schools have staff that have training and expertise and others don't, and a lot of different parts of Penn use additional outside agencies as well. And so that's a whole nother level of things to keep track of.
yep. Sometimes you always want to work from a single source of truth.
Mhm.
That's something that I'm working with now at just the Wharton level. This is not something that Penn is entertaining at the moment, but they're, at least if we can solve it for us at Wharton, we work together enough that perhaps I could say this works and then share
Exactly.
that with another group, and then it spreads in a in a good fashion. So that's something that I'm focused on now. And there's,
Yeah.
you have to be agnostic of the software and people's abilities, and there's things like that. So it's a challenge, and it's not a challenge because you have to go and say what's the best software, because software changes. It's
Right.
more about what does everybody have?
Right.
What can
Because
everybody?
that changes, 10 years ago, Canva didn't exist.
Yeah.
And now it's a huge thing. And it's funny, over in the chat, Bridget Goldhahn, who also works at Penn, confirmed that it was 2004 that
I
this
was close.
change happened.
Thanks, Bridget.
Very, very, very close. And Jory is actually in the chat. Hi, Jory. Is asking, did the inconsistency in the logos by school result from working with different outside agencies over time, or something else, or a combination of things?
Yeah, it can. Absolutely. Hopefully not, though. Not at least when I'm working, when it comes out of my shop, because we have that single source of truth, which is very simply a Dropbox folder and a cloud folder that we all go back and grab the same file and work from there. So we don't grab a file that the vendor has used and then work with it in reverse. So, but it's quite possible. It's quite possible how it moves around.
And Justin, I just want to mention, we're getting a note that there's a periodic kind of notification bong going off every once in a while. So I don't know if you have a computer that you're on that sends notifications. So if there's anything that you might have on in the background that has notifications, I'm going to shut my email down. I don't think it's me, but I don't usually have them on, just in case that's where that's coming from. Thanks, Michael.
Does it say anything personal to me?
Nothing is showing up on the screen. There's no little notification.
Yeah, I don't have anything showing up.
Does it really well. So I turned off something here, and we'll see if that helps. Okay, so one of the questions that we had going into this is, what's the best thing about having, so even you already had a narrow brand structure, you went in recently and just made it even more structured, cleaned it up, made it even more consistent.
Yeah.
In the work that we've done over the years, like I've had clients say things like, oh, geez, does it have to be purple again? When you have a very tight brand structure, from colors, from fonts, from everything, there's always the people that pull against the edges, or a new staff person comes in and, wants to try a new font. What are both the benefits of keeping things really tight, and what are the frustrations?
The good things about having a narrow brand, or rules rather, is at least, let's talk about like the voice and the values and things like that. Everybody can stay on message. So it's very clear on what we all need to be saying. And so every piece that gets created, whether it's in spoken word, written word, or visual, everything is supporting the same message. So in that case, it's easy to grasp. It's easy to move forward. I understand what you're saying about working with just blue and red, because I've been doing that for 17 years almost, and it challenges your creativity, but you'd be shocked at what you could create just with that. And it can be done. And so we've done it.
As you were saying before, I am a firm believer as well that you need constraint. Constraints are a great driver of creativity.
Yeah. So with that, when you choose your fonts and when you choose your colors, it also makes creating a piece much faster. So when there is not only does it unify all of your pieces or help you unify it, it also helps you create a social media piece much faster. If you have all the colors in the world and all the fonts in the world, you'll just be going in circles, not making a decision. And so having that design system set or preset for you is a godsend in a sense, because you move forward with what is your content, you find your imagery, you work within those boundaries, you work within the typography, and you work within the colors, and you can make some really beautiful things.
Right. It's so I have a whole workshop that I do on creativity, and there's a
Yeah.
slide in the workshop that's white. Like there's literally nothing on the side. Every time I go in to update the slide deck, I think that there's a mistake. And then I
Yeah.
realize, no, I have this white slide there on purpose, because a lot of times what I have to tell people is like one of the biggest impediments to creativity is that blank page. When you know you're starting from anything and you
Mhm.
could go any direction, making decisions, like figuring out where to go, it takes so much longer to create, but then it also takes longer through approval,
Yeah,
because people
that's true.
have opinions about everything. Do I like this font? Do I like this color? There's so many more things in the bucket that have to be decided
Yeah,
every single time,
that's a
that
great
it
point.
really does. If you're a high volume shop, it's brutal internally and externally.
So I do have what comes to mind. You brought up Canva, and
Mhm.
my team doesn't typically use Canva as much, but there are people throughout not only my team, my floor, the office, all of Wharton. I'm just showing you the shared board of Wharton,
Oh, that's
and you
awesome.
can see the
Mhm,
consistency at a glance.
mhm,
And we call it, well, I call this the wedge design system, and I can show
mhm,
it to you in detail. But as you go through it, you can see how there are high level designers and there are lower level designers, or people who
mhm.
don't have that much experience at all. They just know how to use the software, and they are pulling in the elements. And if they follow the rules and the rules are laid out, um, then they can make, whomever is in this Canva project, let's say, can make social media headers for their PowerPoints, et cetera, et cetera. And these wedges are very flexible. They go from right to left, up and down. You can make them transparent. And so it's not just the blue and the red in the fonts. There's a lot more that you can do with this. So here
Mhm.
is just an example of how you can stay on brand and use the elements in a narrow design structure.
Now, Justin, are there templates in this Canva space for people to start with,
I
or
believe it started that way, but I can go in here and copy any one that I like, and these now become my new template.
right? So anything that anyone else created is now
Sure.
there to be used as a starting point for anyone else.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
They can come in and they can use it, and uh, someone else can make it better.
mhm.
And I think it was started with your typical things like your headers, your social media, a quote card here, there. And then as things were needed, here's a cover of something.
Right. So this actually gets us a little bit into a question that Jory had sent in
Mhm.
on, um, you know, being the brand police, shall we say, or managing brand. Is there anybody in there looking at all of that Canva work saying, nope, can't use that font. Oh, nope, that's not quite the right blue. How,
Yeah.
like, what happens if people are in there making their own thing and then putting it out there in the world?
Yeah, that's always tough. I mean, not every organization has brand police, and then you have to have the wherewithal or the integrity as the designer to say, I appoint myself, or I'm going to appoint somebody on my staff to be
Mhm.
that person. And then there are the uncomfortable conversations that sometimes have to happen. But if it's written down and if it's displayed, you can show it. So what I'll do here is Jory, I'll show you some things that I've done, that we have done, and we try to really outline some of the items. First, we define every element so we could talk about them in an individual basis.
So you have a
And
common
then,
language.
yeah, and in this this is for Club's logo, and you can see this is even maybe to the lay eye. It still says Wharton, but this says Alumni Club in there, and it had to
Mhm.
get special approval, and I had to lay it out. I had to identify each piece, and then I broke down the shield. And over here, I even had to break down the spacing between every item. You could say I took the spacing between the book,
Wow.
the blue line, and it's whatever this be. And you have to do that because I can't define the rule. I can't define what size that rule is. Is it 1.5 point? Because that's going to
Like
change
it
as it
scales.
scales.
Mhm.
Right. So I'm defining this space anyhow, not to get too granular, but I'm looking for pieces in here. You know, one person had a thought, let's make the rule the size of the serif, the foot of the serif, but the A has a different size than this N, just for example. So you can't go by that. You'll see multiple times over, we use the spacing is a big deal. What is my spacing from the logo all the way around? So we use half a shield. So what can you pull out of your logo that is a consistent piece? Using a half shield here, using half shield on this side of the line, half shield on that side of the line. This was a fun exercise because we had to introduce this rule, and then we had to add another rule. So now there's two.
Yeah,
rules.
and you're right. And it starts to get complicated when you're trying to separate things.
Yes. Here's an example. What do you do with one word versus two words versus three words? What do you do when it's next to it versus stacked? I have it even breaking the line here. You can see the.
So you've gone to a lot of trouble to be super clear and super, you know, explanatory, not just of this is what it looks like, but this is this is what you need to be paying attention to. How do you get this message, this information into the hands of people who are creating things with these assets?
We are publishing this in a common place. We bring it up at staff meetings or all staff. We remind people in one-on-one anytime we can. It's a broken record theory.
Yeah.
You sort of have to bring it in. There are times where you have to either break the rules within reason, or you have to say there are special cases and you're going to need the designer to step in. You know, these don't look anything like the brand that I showed you, but we've predefined the font, and I can go back and get the Wharton logo and in my special way, apply it to each one of these. And I can make it look right, but I've also been working with it for very, very long time. You know, here's a very creative way of you have the
connect them. I've
the
seen that
ND
one,
are
yeah.
hanging off and the shield are hanging off, so it's creating balance. And there's a lot that had to go into this. I think I shared this with you, Beth. The hardest thing I ever had to design was a bookmark because of the small space.
And the unusual, like a skinny vertical. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a
Everybody
couple of
wants to
questions
claim their
coming
stake.
in.
Okay.
So Bridget, who is one of your colleagues at Wharton, at Penn, is asking how many designers does Wharton have?
Oh, I'd have to count.
Ballpark.
That's a loaded question because there's okay, I don't know, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10, but we're not all under the same roof, under the same structure either.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes it more even.
Yeah, we have 3 separate large communication teams, one for executive education, one for external affairs, which is also AKA development and alumni relations, which is and then there's central Marcom or marketing team, which is Wharton's team. So Wharton owns the brand, and then the other communication teams would use the brand. They Wharton Central define the colors and the fonts and such.
Right. So now they can know that having more people doesn't necessarily make things easier.
No.
And then a second question came in from Bridget. This branding document is amazing, but with so many rules and so granular, is it realistic to expect non-marketing university individuals, like maybe faculty, staff, or students, to interpret it or be able to follow it? Like, where's the over/under on that?
I think that's a good question. And that's probably why Penn has opted to be very narrow in back to that, because people aren't going to read it. It's like reading specs for, putting together your desk from IKEA or something for some people. Some people really dig their heels in and some people just gloss over. So it really depends on who you're giving it to. It's really, this document is really for onboarding. It's for people who, the larger document is for my team to reference. And it's also a place to fall back on when somebody says, I'm tired of blue. Why do we have to use
Right.
blue? Can we use a different color? So it's really, it's like a style guide. It is
Right.
our style guide
Hmm.
for writing. We have those as well for the magazine. There's a style guide, and there's a style guide for writing reports. And we just have to, like marketing 101, work with us, stay within our bubble, and then
Hmm.
gradually work our way out until it makes sense for other people as well. And we're happy to be there to help them. It's just, we have to do what we need to do first and then help everybody else. So um, again, Penn's branding is narrow, but it also affords Wharton to color outside the lines. So as long as we stick with the core values and the core messaging, we can also change. And so also keep in mind that what I'm sharing with you is a collection of different we have different brand systems
Hmm.
within Wharton. So without getting into that, what you're seeing is many examples of different collections and how it's changed and evolved. And I have a different system for the campaign, the giving campaign that we just finished up, because we wanted that to have a distinct look from the
Right.
school itself, so that donors could tell when they're being spoken to versus when it's just the general public, like student admissions.
Hmm.
So that could be that could be a different discussion for a different day.
Exactly. There's so much here.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was wondering, so now you've just updated this logo and you've kind of crystallized this line, you've changed these different things. One of the things I talk about with people a lot is you make one change, one
Mhm.
change, and it's this cascade effect. And once you've made this change, you've probably got, I mean, countless numbers of pieces from, a business card or a flyer that might need to be updated to expensive things like signage and websites that need to be updated. How do you go about rolling out a change? Is it,
Mhm.
all at once, or do you let some things go?
Yeah.
What do you do when it's so
Yeah.
much?
In my experience, it's just, and with the limited, I know it's all relative, but the limited resources I have, we can't just flip the switch. We can try and get ready best we can, but there are things that just have to wait and wait their turn
Mhm.
until we get to that part of the season where we're working on, let's say, reunion. Can't touch
Mhm.
reunion now, because right now we're working on the end of the year strategy and today's Giving Tuesday.
Right.
So we're working on that right now. Actually, we're done with Giving Tuesday. We're on to the end of the year,
Mhm.
starting now. So that's what we're working on. The with the rule under the logo, we um, we we're not expected to change all the apparel at once, or all of the logos in the buildings all at once. It was deplete your supply.
Mhm.
If you have budget attached to it, go ahead and finish the budget. And then as you need to replenish your jackets and your hats and your t-shirts, and if you renovate your office, that's when you change it.
Got it.
And that was a concern. And so
Mhm.
that was a decision that Penn Central had to make, because just like you can't roll it all out at once, you can't think of everything either.
Mhm.
These come,
Right.
these problems, these real world problems just come as you face them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have another question from Jory. How do you manage approvals? Does all promotional material run through your office before it's allowed to be used out publicly?
Yeah, there is business services office that is Penn level, and they are the logo police in terms of giving approval to a third party promotional company. And 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 we have run into some things with that. So if I update my document and I forget to give it to business services,
Mhm.
and business services has whatever they have in their files, something comes across their desk, let's say it's a hat or a pen, and it doesn't match what the documentation I've given them, it gets denied. And that's happened. And so who do they call? They don't know. So, you know, it's up to me to say, hey, I am the contact for this, or somebody else. And I do give approval. That is new branding that we've approved. And there is a bit of a process, and again, an education internally, and you just can't think of it all. But that happens, and business services also approves all the vendors. So, you know, they have to be approved at that level, and every business and every company has its own billing process, and Penn has centralized it here at business services, and so the logo gets shut down if it doesn't match their documentation too.
And it's such an interesting structure that you have centralized business services, but decentralized brand management.
Yeah, it is.
Make things more complicated.
Yeah, it is something that needs to be justified, and a business case needs to be made, and it could save a lot of money if it's done right. You could walk through campus, and there's hundreds of buildings, and the signage on those buildings differ, and the signage outside, the directional signage, those fonts and those logos could be different as well, and so on and so forth. I can name a whole bunch, but those are some examples.
Absolutely. We have another question from Jennifer Jackson, who wrote in before the webinar. And Jennifer is the CEO of Interfaith Prison Ministry for Women. And she asks, what are your suggestions when thinking about a brand rollout? Thinking about the criteria behind the decisions, such as rolling out a new brand all at once, or as you roll it out, how much do you reference your previous name, especially if rebranding includes a name change? You know, do you reference your old name? Do you put your old name followed by your new name followed by old name? How quickly would you let it all go? Now, in Penn's case, you never said we're not Penn anymore. We're, you know, something totally different. But lots of organizations go through a complete name change, and many universities, and probably some of the colleges within your university, kind of thought of themselves as the name first. Like Wharton retained its name as a dominant, but in lots of other universities, it didn't happen that way. It was then became the university, or, you know, of whatever. And then, you know, Fox School of Business kind of as a subsidiary or child type of a thing. And you have that within Penn, other schools that still maintain the Penn first and College of Nursing second. So when it really is a getting people attached to something as big as a name change, you know, what are your thoughts on how to communicate that and how to transition that?
Yeah, it certainly needs some sort of a strategy around it. And it depends what you want people to remember, retain, or what do you want them to forget? And so it's really hard to say, Jennifer, without asking you many more questions, but I can say this happens a lot with marketing campaigns. And when we switch marketing campaigns, we decide to have a cutoff date, and we shut down the former and we change it to the new, and we move forward. Maybe the frequency of the new marketing campaign is a lot heavier, and so our strategy would be to decrease frequency as we're going out and increase frequency as we're coming in. There could be press releases for you that you do, and to prime the market that your name is changing. You could also do more content. You could do social, so that's where frequency can also come in if you can't buy ads. You can purchase social media that targets your constituents so that they're seeing it more and more. Of course, I would use everything available to me, email, etc., so that people understand the change if they need an explanation. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you don't need to do that. Sometimes you have content planned, and you're priming the market, and you're about to come out with video, etc. of why your name changed. And so it's really hard to answer that without getting
I
deep.
know it's there's no sort of
Um,
it's definitely an it depends, but I think that those are
yeah,
really good ideas and suggestions. And I think that's a really good point. Some people, say nothing to their community and they want that big sort of open the curtain reveal. I
yeah,
think that's a great thing to be discussing at the very, very beginning stage before you even decide to do a rebranding, to
right.
really think about, is this going to be a collaborative, community involved process? Are we going to be updating people and sharing things? And is it a strategic rebrand where you are, repointing your new North Star towards new strategic goals?
Right.
So you have the opportunity to tell that story of, this isn't just a new name or a new logo. These are visual hooks to help connect you to how we've evolved
Yeah.
versus, you don't really want to go out there and say our stuff was really old and ugly and
Hmm.
we got a new CEO who hated it. And that's why you now have a blue elephant as opposed to, a green pond.
Right.
Like that's not a story you want to tell publicly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think that it also takes some time to ask, always ask your customers
mhm,
or ask your board members and ask people what they think. Get a collection of those thoughts, get a collection of some measurement so you can say, for example, if you're changing your name altogether, you could say formerly known as, and you say, we're going to keep that in the tagline for 2 years and
right.
then it'll go away.
Mhm,
Or do we need to keep it indefinitely? Or you just need something to help you justify what your decision is, come up with some way of benchmarking that. Ask your customers if they like the new thing or is it necessary. Okay, so for example, I know Beth, you talk a lot about the evolution of Apple and Starbucks. They
mhm,
make incremental changes to their mark. I know we're not doing a name change in this case, but if you're doing an incremental change, you can just let the old mark fizzle out over time and then start introducing the new mark as you create new things, just like Penn's
yeah,
strategy.
it's really good. That's a
And
good point.
Penn has an incremental, in this case, we're talking about adding a rule and fixing the shield. The layperson isn't going to know the difference and it didn't change much. That doesn't sound like that's the case with you, Jennifer. You've got some more elements to consider. And so I think getting some sort of a benchmark and some feedback will help justify whatever your strategy is. As long as you have a strategy that tells you what you're going to do and you're defining the what, coming up with a little bit of background to explain how you had an informed decision is going to help. And I don't think you're going to go wrong either way.
That's great. One of the other things that Jennifer had said was, that their closest constituencies know their brand in full, and the people maybe a further out don't know it as well. So, like on top of all of the things that you said, you may need a different strategy to. I always like to call them your connoisseurs versus your consumers. The way you transition your brand to your board and your volunteers and your involved people may be very different than what you do to the external edges of your target. How you get that out there. If there's no attachment or familiarity with your previous name, it's in some ways less effort that you need to take to unhook them from your current one and transition them over. You
Yeah.
just need to start building up awareness and engagement. We always say you've got to take people through know, feel, do.
Yeah.
And people aren't going to take action until they care. People aren't going to care until they're aware. So when you go through a name change and a logo change, you've got to go all the way back and say, what do we need people, like, where do we need to start people? And different audiences have to start at different places.
Yeah. And here's a really interesting thing that I found out is you get tired of it before everybody else.
I
And
tell
you're
people that all the
staring
time.
you're staring at it for a year or more before it's even rolled out. And that's what's happening with something design system that we have. We used it for 3 years and people were getting tired of we did a blue overlay on top of all the photographs and there was a reason for that, et cetera. And and we're only speaking to donors and alumni relations folks. So we're doing it for sales and customer service, if you will. And so the 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 broader public, the general public, the students who are applying to Wharton haven't seen our design system because we haven't targeted them. So a really small, tiny group of people have only seen our design system. The way I like to say it is we've proved it out, and we've worked out every design problem that you could throw at us, and we've now proven it. It's been under a 3-year trial period. Now it's time to roll out. And people are telling me that they're tired of it already, and I have to remind them that nobody's seen it,
Yeah,
relatively
right.
speaking. So it's still fresh and new, even though, you know, we've used it for 3 years. It means I've looked at it for at least 4 years, because we
That
start,
is
you know,
so
18 months
critical.
before.
You know, especially because I know we have a lot of, you know, people that are in-house doing this work every day. And I feel it the same way. You know, if you, especially if you are a designer or maybe working with a designer or bringing somebody new involved to be involved with your brand, you know, people, creative people like change, and we want to do something different all the time. But to be branded requires some resistance to that, some willingness to be creative with it. We call it narrowing the cattle chutes. You know, if you get it really, really narrow, sometimes, you know, you have rogue people jumping out to the sides. If you get it really wide, it's so broad that it doesn't amount to anything. So figuring out like where's the right cattle chute so that there's enough flexibility for all the things that you need to do to have distinctiveness without it falling apart and not being cohesive anymore is it's I find it to be a very interesting challenge when it comes to brand.
Sure. Yeah, and you can have fun. I mean, you could have fun and try and make things, and you can make things different. You just need to know what your constraints are.
Exactly. So speaking of constraints, we have about 10 minutes left here. So we're going to jump into managing design when you've got multiple logos. But for everyone that's listening, if you have questions for Justin that you want me to get in before we wrap up here today, put them into the chat or put them into the Q&A now, and make sure that I get to any of your questions. And while we're doing that, I know one of the things that we told people we were going to talk about is, like, what do you do when there's lots of different logos? Yours are all so similar looking. I know I originally had thought, well, you know, you've got the Wharton logo, but it's not that simple. There's lots of constituencies in the organization. You've got sponsors, you've got partners. How do you deal with it when you've got, you know, a festival of logos that need to all be represented?
We
A deep sigh that you start with. I think everyone can feel that, right?
we do have a festival. You stay true to your design system best you can. When you color outside the lines or break the rules within reason, then you have to make sure that you can justify it. And a lot of times we get requests for things. You know, people come up with new names and new product lines, let's say, and they want a logo for it, and we do have to push back and say, we're not going to do a logo. It doesn't warrant a logo.
Do you have the authority in your office to say that?
Yes, however, we have to have a solution already in place to accommodate that. And so in our case, we do. We have, you know, we have figured out a way to quickly make infographics. We have a way to quickly do co-branding or sub-brands. And so, but that took years and years of work and trial and error. And, you know, we didn't know what the problems were when we were walking into it. And so we hope that we figured it all out.
And is it more of a like graphic design visual challenge? Like how do we make all of these logos look good on a page? Or is it more of a hierarchical challenge? Like, I have to say, is it more about positioning of the schools or the assets of the brands? You know, do you have that sort of who gets priority issues, or is it just, you know, because interestingly, a lot of the logos that you deal with all look very similar, and there's challenges with having repeated objects that are similar but not exactly the same from a graphic design perspective. And there's different challenges with, well, we've got one of each, we've got a sponsor logo, we've got a Wharton logo, we've got something else, like, we've got the knowledge at Wharton, like, so you've got, like, where are the biggest challenges?
Well, the Shield and the Wharton and the University of Pennsylvania have to be on the piece somewhere.
Okay.
On the same piece of real estate. We have taken the sub brand or the co-brand and they're on opposite corners. Sometimes we marry them together in the same lockup. It depends on the piece. If it's a website, then Wharton is already baked into the navigation. So do we need it lower? There's sometimes where we can't get away with having it repeat itself.
Right. Yeah.
There are a lot of things that, the Wharton way. So we can't say Wharton logo and then next to it say the Wharton way, and then it says Wharton way. And so we contend with all these visual problems and these word problems, and so that's where you have to remain flexible, and that's why we try to have a system that accommodates that, and that system that accommodates for that is using typography.
Talk a little bit more about that. So how are you using typography? Like, what solutions have you, because I think that's really what people are coming for. Like, what solutions have you found?
Well, I'll take this slide, for example. So you look at the fonts that we've chosen, and this font, New Grotesque, which is our display font, has all these different weights, has 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And so we are able to make very different looking things. However, it's all the same font family.
Right. I'm a big fan of that, of choosing a font family that has a lot of different ways. We have a client that we were using, I think Tofino Pro with, and I think there were 30 different between heaviness and width. There were so many different variations that we could just with one font make things look vastly different. Yeah.
And Corey, my art director, did these. So he's very well versed, and we're dealing with another issue now that came up today where we have to have another reunion next to this reunion. And so they have to look like they're different. This global forums and global symposium are different. They're not the same project, but they have to be kissing cousins because they're related, but they're not the same. And so we get into some really granular competing events. And so in this case, we would have the Wharton logo, and then the team or the group that owns it, which is Lifelong Learning. And then what is the actual thing? The actual thing is this event in Singapore. And then we have this tagline we have to include. There's a lot of elements. Yeah.
I think one of the things you definitely have working for you is that you picked two fonts that have extremely different characteristics, like the traditional, the font. What's the font that you're using for Wharton, the serif font that you have?
This is Georgia. That's a system.
Okay, so yeah, system font. So Georgia and New Grotesque Square are they're so visually different from each other that they can pair up well. Sometimes when you have things that are more similar in weight, in shape, in size, they can not pair, but like often sometimes putting two different sans serif fonts together can sometimes be tricky because they're so similar in some cases. You've got one font that's maybe a little more narrowed naturally and one that's a little squarer more naturally. So you can even see, even at this distance, the impact of those different fonts on a page.
Yep.
Which definitely gives you a lot of variety.
You could see here that we decide to use the display font in the logo. So we naturally don't want to go and use the display font for the large text. So we flip it and we lead with this. But it's very versatile using this sort of idea.
That's great. That's really, really helpful. So do we have, I just want to make sure that I take a moment to ask if there's any other kind of key questions or burning things that we haven't covered today that any of you think that would be really helpful to talk with while we still have have Justin on the line here. If you have anything else, just please feel free to put that in. I know these things are so challenging, keeping everything organized, making them look interesting. The one question I would say a lot of people have is the actual assets, these logos, these files. How do you manage keeping them organized? Do you have a central drive that everyone has access to? Do you have a public website that people can download logos from? What do you centralize and make accessible for your team versus what do you make available for, other people, like outside users of your brand?
We typically don't allow people to download things. We have some things that we could do that so what we have to do to manage volume is determine what is classified as a design, the skill of design is needed. So a PowerPoint presentation should be just a typical business program that people know how to use. We provide the template and they can build their own PowerPoints. The logo we can make available if we'd like. There's not too many things that we want to give away, especially the logo, because sometimes people want to stick it on a water bottle or a pen and those wouldn't be the same logo. Sometimes we have to alter it. And so we don't just want people going out. They'll say, hey, I want it for this. And then we say, can you give us the specs? Because we'll try it. We'll investigate it, make sure that it works.
Yeah.
We keep everything in a cloud program. We use Dropbox. The university also has Box. So the idea is that everybody works off the same drive and nothing is on their local machine. So
Yes.
if anything tanks, if anything, gets corrupt or you lose your machine, all of the work is still saved in the same place. Anybody can get to it on the team and pick up where you left off. And also, if somebody needs the file, I'm on vacation and we're working with a printer, I can get to it as well from my phone. So that has worked well, either Box or Dropbox or something, Google Drive, something like that. But it has to be something shared that everybody's in agreement. The taxonomy is something we're always struggling with. We're still working on that. It's changing. That's the next project. And that's how we've managed the assets.
Fabulous. Okay, so Gary's asking if you can go back to the hierarchy slide to get one more look at it before and after changes. Just the way of the approach will be helpful to review again. And Jose is also asking, while we're jumping in and taking a look at that, the best program for design. So Jose, Elena, hi Elena, says Canva is pretty user friendly. If you're really a beginner, Canva can be great. I'm not a big fan of Canva for complex or more multi-page or things that you're going to have to print, but it's excellent for on-screen graphics, email headers, social media posts, anything that's going to, anything like that is going to be terrific for social media, email, website graphics. The industry standard for professionals is InDesign for graphic design, but it is also an expensive tool and it is not easy to learn. So Canva is a great place to start for a beginner. And as you evolve, moving towards InDesign, or if anybody would love to get to the point where they have InDesign, but the budget is a problem, there is a newer tool called Affinity Designer that I'm hearing people rave about that is a very cost-effective tool that works a lot like InDesign. Okay, so Gary, is confirming, Gary, okay, this is the slide you're looking for. Fabulous. Oh, it's so funny, Gary. Does anybody still use Quark? When I first started my business, when I first started in design way back in 1988, we all were on PCs and we had to use this thing called Ventura Publisher. It was just painful. And I begged and begged and begged to use Quark, and we used Quark for years. I am sure that there are some people that still use Quark. And if any of you guys use Quark, I loved Quark. But when InDesign got created, now InDesign is actually a redevelopment of the old PageMaker. And when they started packaging InDesign with Illustrator and Photoshop, and then eventually creating Creative Cloud, it just, from a financial perspective, it just faded away with Quark faded away. It's paying for Quark and then also paying for the Creative Cloud apps just really wasn't really much of a thing anymore. I'm assuming you guys don't use it. Do you use InDesign, Justin?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if that's kind of the most place. And then Michael's putting in a few other great tools. I don't know if it's Scribus or how you pronounce it, but I've also heard of that one. It's really good. So the name of the software that I talked about was Affinity Design, or is it, I don't know if it's Design or Designer, but it's Affinity Design. Michael has it in, oh, it's to host and panelist, Affinity Design. There's also like Affinity Illustrator, Affinity. It basically has all of the same package of tools that that Adobe Creative Cloud would have under the Affinity name. And I mean, I've heard great things about how good they are. So, so tell me, everybody, was this helpful today? I hope this was a good conversation for you. I hope you got to see some really interesting things and had the opportunity to sort of peek behind the curtain at what, you know, a really large, complicated brand has to structure. So Justin, thank you so much for giving us your time, for putting these slides together so we could really visualize the things that you were working with today. Thanks, Elena. I thank you all for coming. I hope that we see you. Our next actual class that's coming up not next week, the week after next, is going to be our class actually on how do you bring in vendors and tools and manage vendors, whether it's printing or creative vendors or any kind of people. How do you expand your team to get the things that you want, from little tiny incremental ways to do that all the way up to bigger, more complex ways to do it. So we're going to be talking about dealing with, you know, vendors and subcontractors and tools in 2 weeks. And then in January, our course, our whole foundations course is going to be starting back over again. And one of the things that we did hear from people is, it sounds great, I love the curriculum, but a year is a really long time to wait for the whole course. So we're actually compacting the course. We're doing it in 6 months. We're going to be doing 2 classes per month. From January through June. And then in the second half of the year, next year, we're going to be teaching and focusing on the elements of branding and brand strategy. So I'm really excited about a couple of those things coming up. And in February, I think it's February 1st or February 2nd, we're actually going to be having our next class, like our next program like this, our next free community program. And we're going to have Krista Fazio from Unionville School District come on. Some of you have been on things with me where you've seen the work that we did with Unionville to help them reimagine and redesign their mascot. And Krista is going to come on and tell you the backstory of how they worked with the community of students and got collaborative, did all this amazing collaborative work that they did internally. We came in at the logo and mascot design level to help guide their community through creating it. But she did some really, really cool work to make decisions and make people really excited about change. And I think that that's a big thing a lot of times, is how do you go through a change and get people to adopt it? Because other school districts are struggling with the same racial and societal and social issues around their identities, around their mascots, as Unionville was. And the outcomes have been much more resistant, much more argumentative. And Krista created this process that was really, really supportive and encouraging. And the results are really amazing. I think you're going to be really excited to hear what she has to say. So thank you guys all for joining us today. Justin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming on, and I hope to see everyone next time. Take care. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.